Before I go to that whiteboard description, let me point out that what I refer to those directed control cores and keys as is the grandmother's bridge club. All right. So she interacts with them every Wednesday. They play bridge or whatever, and grandfather has nothing to do with them. He does not have access to those ladies. He gets his hands slapped, right? Yet, she's still very powerful, and she has access to those card playing buddies. But grandfather is unable to get and be able to operate the cores in a directed control group. All right, so the next slide I've got up here talks about Xing, or selective keying, they would call it in the industry, but Xing is what we call it. And if you've got a best Marshall best system, you kind of understand that there are sometimes cores with X's on them. The little note I have at the top of this says, when there is an X, you must look for an explanation. Something strange is going on in a core. Okay, so I think what I've explained so far, you kind of get the idea that if a core is marked with a 1-2 on it, the 1-2 key is going to work in it. The father of his system, the master one, is going to work in that core. The grandmaster, is going to work in that core, and the control key is going to pull that core. That's straight arrow, plain on the face type of keying work. So once you decide to do something a little trickier, and I'll explain why you might do this, then you got to start marking the cores differently. You only mark the cores this way, but you want to put a little X on the core, and then the company that serves your purposes is going to explain what that X represents. So what is the explanation? And I've got a couple of scenarios here. One is what we would call maybe a common access core. We might have a core that we build up underneath that first building, the high school building, that every stinking key in the building works in it. And we'd call that like a common core. And we'd mark it perhaps 1X, which is what I've got here. And the explanation is given right nearby in parentheses. OP means operated. The 1X is common access operated by all 1 keys, all 1 series keys. So anything that starts with a 1 is going to get into that X core. Another scenario you might not want it to be that open, that general of an access, but you might want still a little bit of helpful keying work done in a core. And so I've got a 1-5X here. It's called the main office entry, operated by a 1-6 and a 1-7. Okay, so what we've got is a 1-5 core, where a 1-5 key should work in it, and a master 1, grandmaster control. But also we've got 2 other keys that are going to work in this core because we pinned it a little funny. And we put an X on there explaining what we did. So what we have is the main office entry. That core is also going to be operated by the regional manager's office, which is a 1-6 key. And it's also going to be operated by the conference room key, which is a 1-7 key. Now I'm going to go to a next slide and show you this in a map. It's kind of based upon the TV sitcom The Office. If you're not familiar with that, no big deal. If you are, you're going to recognize the layout here. What we did is we took that 1-5X core and we stuck it into the main door that comes into the whole office complex. A 1-5X core is going to be put into the lock that goes into the main office complex. But then we've got 2 other rooms here. Michael, who's the regional manager, has got a 1-6 core in his lock, and his 1-6 key works in his 1-6 core. And then we got a 1-7 core in the conference room, which is going to have a 1-7 key that would operate the conference room. And sometimes Michael would maybe give a key to Dwight, who normally sits out in a cubicle, but to Dwight, he'd give that key to make him feel important. So Dwight's 1-7 key would work in the conference room, and that's all it would get into, except that key would also work to get into the main office altogether, just like Michael's key. Remember, we keyed that 1-5X core so that both of these keys would automatically work in it. So Michael doesn't have to carry a 1-5 key, because his 1.6 key works in that 1.5x core. But you could give 1.5 keys to the people who work in the office that don't need to have access to either of those two rooms. Their 1.5 key would then only let them in the core marked 1.5x. So that brings us to another option for when you're figuring out your building's needs and you're trying to establish a good master key system. If you're, again, typically in a high school scenario, each master, it does have its own family. Okay, the master one works in everything that begins with a 1. But it will usually have a direct keys, but it might also have a submaster set up in that building. So typically in the high school, it's like the athletic area. A lot of different weird needs in the athletic area. So what we do is we set up a little kingdom within the kingdom. All right. So we might have a group need. So we got many different needs in the athletic area where we'd like it so we could just give the AD, the athletic director, or maybe the gym teachers one key that gets into all their stuff, but we still had to kind of pigeonhole some areas. I'll show you what I mean here. In a gymnasium area, you have some common access areas where you're going to kind of X those so everybody's key works in those areas. It might be the lights, or maybe the key that gets you directly just into the gymnasium. Something you can issue out to people. But you've also got the, so I broke this up a little different. You've got locker room and lights type of an area. Okay, so people that might use it, church group might use it, 4-H club might come and use the gymnasium, or whatever. You don't want them everywhere, but you do need them to get the lights on and get them into the locker room. Coach areas, you've got certain seasonal people that come in. They're not the Phi-Ed teacher, but they kind of got to get into some of the areas, like the towel room. If you're a coach, you got to be able to get into that. Maybe into the coach's office, you'd need them to get into. So those select areas that just the coaches need to get into. And then the Phi-Ed only areas. There's storage for Phi-Ed people. A lot of times they keep cones and what do they call those, orange vests or whatever. Some of those different things that they use regularly for a Phi-Ed that they don't want the coaches getting at. Okay, so you don't want the coach's key to work in the Phi-Ed only areas because the coaches end up taking the cones and using them or whatever, and a Phi-Ed teacher doesn't have them when he needs them, and it just creates a lot of headaches. But then you also have like different storage needs. The football team has stuff that they've got in cages that they need to lock up their helmets and shoulder pads and all this kind of thing. The tennis people have different needs for tennis, cross country. A lot of times you got little cubicles of storage that you want to give each person their own key, and that works fine. Sometimes you can make them all the same coach's key, but it's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. So what we want to do is we want to create a little submaster because, quite frankly, the Phi-Ed teacher, the main two, usually a man and a woman, depending on what they're responsible for, you want them to be able to have one key that gets into everything because they got to come and go pretty much everywhere. And so we give them the submaster 1A key. And a lot of times we just mark that key 1A. And we know that everything that starts with a 1A, it gets into, it operates. Otherwise, you can pigeonhole and issue out people keys as you need to. Of course, it still starts with a 1. So even though it's a little kingdom on its own, it's not on its own. It still answers to the master one. The master one gets into all of this stuff too. So the custodians can come and get into here. The building principal can get through all these areas as well. As the Grand Master, the Director of Facilities and Maintenance guys, etc., they're going to be able to get into all these areas as well. And the control key can still pull all of those cores. So, quick test, quick quiz. If I asked you right now, and I'm not going to be able to get an answer here, but I asked you if I've got a 1A3 core, okay, which is located right here. Phi-Ed only areas. Tell me the different key cuts that should work in that 1A3 core if we've done it correctly, right? Tell me the different cuts that should work in that 1A3 key. In other words, the different keys, okay? And I'm going to tell you the answer in a minute. Just have you think on that a little bit. Don't worry about the number of keys I have up there. It's not representative of anything necessarily. All right? Now you got to think a little more on that. Okay, I'm going to tell you right now. If I've got a 1A3 core, that 1A3 key has to work in it because that's how it's pinned up. There's no X on it. It starts with a 1 and an A. Okay, the 1A3 key has to be able to work in that 1A3 core when we're done. Also, it starts, it falls underneath this submaster, this little kingdom within the kingdom. So this submaster 1A key is also going to be working in this core when it's done being pinned up. None of the other 1A keys should work in it. Okay, don't be confused about the 1AX core. It has nothing to do with it. This has no X on it. The 1A3 key works. The submaster 1A key works. Is that it? No. The master 1 should also work in it because it begins with a 1, just like that core mark begins with a 1. But none of these keys are going to work in it. Then we jump up to grandfather and grandmother. The grandmaster key should work in that 1A3, and the control key should be able to pull it. Those are the only keys. Control, grandmaster, master 1, submaster 1A, and the 1A3 itself. Another quiz. If you've got a 1-5 core, tell me all the keys that are supposed to be working in a 1-5 core. This one's a little simpler. All right? Here are the keys that should work in the 1-5 core. First of all, there's no X on the core, so nothing goofy is going on here. The only keys that should work in it are the 1-5 key, the master 1, because it begins with the 1, grandpa and grandma, the grandmaster key, the GM key, and the control key, the C key, should pull those cores. Here's another one, okay? The core mark is 1AX. Now that should tell you right away something fishy's going on in that core. Look for the explanation in order to determine all the keys that are working in it, all right? So if I've got a 1AX core, which is located right here, I need to know all the keys that are going to work in it. Think about that one for a second. No, I really am going to pause here because you really need to think about it, not just wait for the answers. And if you don't really know me already, I kind of joke around a lot, so just take that as a joke. Okay, I'm going to tell you now. If you've got a 1AX core, right, that X tells you, first of all, something very important. It tells you that the 1AX core is a common access core. There's a lot of keys that are going to work in it potentially. In fact, it says it's going to be operated, OP operated, by all the 1A keys. So anything that starts with a 1A, and we don't even know, because I've got the etc. down here, we don't even know how many keys that will be. It could be 16, could be 64, powers of 4, don't worry about that. All of those 1A keys are going to work in this 1AX core. Also, the submaster 1A key will work in it. The master 1, but not any of these. It didn't say that any of those 1s were going to work. But all of these, the submaster 1A, the master 1, the grandmaster, and the control key will all be pinned up to work in that 1AX core. Another one for you. I've got a core here, it just says HS1 on it. Tell me all the keys that should work in the HS1 core. I'm not going to give you as much time to think this time. Okay, so it looks like this core has been put in the athletic director's office or something to do with the athletic director. Must be kind of a higher security need because it starts with the HS, high security, right? If you remember, the HS cores and keys were card playing buddies of the Grand Master, so they really had nothing to do with his family members. So the keys that should work in this core are the HS1 key, the Grand Master key, because they are his card playing buddies, and the control key can still pull those cores out of the lock that they've been put in. Some keying systems can become pretty complex, but the principles don't change. What we've discussed here is pretty much how you go about it, no matter how complex you get. A rose by any other name is still a rose, and you can see the family tree, the master three, problem child, of course, with his kids, but this is a true schematic that's represented one of our customers. They've got a control key, a Grand Master key. They've got two different masters. One's for academic stuff, one's for restrictive areas, more administrative. They've got different submasters. They've got direct cuts. They've got submasters. They've got sub-submasters. I'm not even representing a lot of the individual things here, but the scheme of it is the same as we just showed you a minute ago. It's still that family tree concept. It's still this, only according to need, it was expanded to fit the profile that was desired by the customer. That's Masterkeying, all in the family. It's all I have to share with you. It's kind of a primer. And I know in a keying meeting there are questions and concerns, and is this going to work this? And it becomes a little more cumbersome, but it is still the same basic concept. So if you want to look at this video, please do it again and again to get a feel. But then we're always available for keying meetings, phone calls, even remote keying meetings if we need to do it that way. Thanks.